It's done by Charles Loma, who is a Hopi artist, Hopi jeweler. I was with my mother in the early to mid 80s in Santa Fe when she bought it. There was a Charles Loma show, and Mother had always wanted a piece of his jewelry, and so we went to the show and she bought this.
And he was there?
He was there. I met him.
Yeah.
Sort of a little short man.
Yeah. He was born in 21, so he would have been in his late 60s.
Probably, yeah, because I think he died in 91.
91, yeah.
Some bracelets shine because of their materials. This one commands attention because it carries the full signature language of Charles Loloma. Bought in Santa Fe in the early to mid-1980s, it belongs to the mature period of the Hopi artist born in 1921 and deceased in 1991, now widely recognized as one of the most important Native American jewelers, and more broadly, one of the great American jewelry artists of the 20th century. Museum records show that Loloma worked across several mediums, but his bracelets became the clearest expression of his revolution in jewelry. What makes this piece so extraordinary is the work hidden inside its beauty. The bracelet combines lapis lazuli, turquoise, Mediterranean coral, and deep purple stone, all individually cut and fitted before being set into 14-karat gold. That process is central to Loloma's art. He did not treat jewelry as flat ornament. He built it like a small sculpture, using color depth and balance to create something both powerful and refined. Comparable museum examples from the 1970s and 1980s show the same emphasis on rich inlay, bold gold structure, and material contrast. That is why this bracelet feels larger than jewelry. It is not just a beautiful accessory, it is a mature Loloma work, where design, craftsmanship, and artistic identity become one.
If this piece came up for sale at auction, I think it would easily bring 40 to 50,000 and perhaps as high as 55,000.
Oh my.
It's just fabulous. It's the top of his work.
I knew it was a wonderful piece. I didn't realize it had appreciated that much.
Yeah.
But it's gorgeous. I love it.
These came down to me from my great-grandfather, who acquired them out in Nebraska. He ran the government store among the Indians from 1871 to 1873. And while he was out there, of course, he interacted with the various tribes that came through. And this is just a small sampling of the items he brought back.
These 4 objects feel less like collected curiosities and more like a small surviving world from the plains. Passed down from a great-grandfather who worked in Nebraska in the early 1870s, they bring together the practical skill, beauty, and symbolism of native life on the 19th century plains. The group includes a rare parfleche trunk of painted rawhide, a possible bag for storing personal goods, an elk, antler quirt used on horseback, and an elk horn hide scraper used in preparing hides. Museum collections confirm that parfleches were rawhide containers made by plains peoples, usually painted with bold geometric designs, while hide scrapers and beaded bags belonged to the daily work and material culture of the same world. What makes this group exceptional is the range of life it covers. The large parfleche trunk is unusual because most parfleches are flatter envelope forms meant for carrying goods, while a trunk of this scale points to storage for more substantial belongings. The possible bag adds another layer, and the mixed bead sizes fit the period when trade bead styles were changing across the plains in the mid-19th century. The quirt carries the force of horseback life, serving both as riding equipment and, at times, as a weapon. The scraper brings us into the work of hide preparation, where elk horn tools were central to turning buffalo or deer hides into usable material. Seen together, these are not random survivals. They are a compact portrait of Plains mobility labor trade and ceremony.
These 4 pieces, I would conservatively say $130,000 to $200,000.
Well, they're real treasures.
They are absolutely treasures.
And I'm so pleased that we have retained them and they can be passed down through the generations.
I'm glad you have too.
My parents bought this, I believe, in the early 80s from a gallery. Was either down on Larimer Square here in Denver or in Santa Fe, I'm not sure which. And it's been hanging place of pride in our living room ever since. The house I grew up in, it's been a constant presence in my life, you know, as a child. And it's just such a beautiful piece of work. And we're just really very happy. Mom had a great eye for art.
This image feels delicate at first, but its real power lies in how quietly original it is. The artist is John Quick-to-See Smith, born in 1940 in Montana, later recognized as one of the most important Native American artists of her generation, with a career spanning painting, printmaking, and mixed media. She was a citizen of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and also of Shoshone and Métis heritage, and her work is now held by major museums, including the Whitney and the National Gallery of Art. What makes this piece especially compelling is that it is not a standard print, but a monotype ghost image. In that process, the painted surface is pressed once, then printed again a second time, producing a softer, more atmospheric impression. Here, Smith strengthened that ghost image by adding painted dots and further details, giving the work a layered presence that feels both spontaneous and controlled. The pencil signature and the artist's own reaction in the story suggest this was a very early work, likely from the 1970s, which fits the period when she was beginning to gain recognition as a painter and printmaker. That is why this work matters. It is not only an original image, but an early glimpse of an artist who would go on to reshape contemporary Native art. If
this was to come to market today, it would sell for between $30,000 and $60,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Her paintings have jumped. They've gone into the 6 figures.
Mm-hmm.
It's an argillite totem pole. The argillite comes from the Queen Charlotte Islands. It was purchased by my grandfather back in the 1920s. He found it in a store while he was working up in Canada back then. He was in the import-export business, and this was left in a store by someone who had commissioned it out and never picked it up.
What looks at first like a carved souvenir is really a small monument carrying the memory of an entire village. This argillite totem pole model comes from Haida, Guay, historically known as the Queen Charlotte Islands, where argillite, a dark stone found only there, became one of the most distinctive materials in Haida carving. By the late 19th century, Haida artists were creating these model poles for outside buyers, translating the scale and authority of monumental village poles into a form that could travel. What makes this example so impressive is the richness of its imagery. At the top stands a raven holding a human figure within its wings. Below that appears a fierce winged grizzly bear with another figure emerging from its body, followed by a wolf, an upside-down human form, and another raven with what seems to include killer whale imagery in the side fins. These are not random decorations. In Haida art, such figures act as clan crests, visual signs of ancestry land and inherited identity. A full-size pole of this kind would have told approaching visitors exactly whose place they had entered and what mythic beings shaped that family's history. The carving itself has real sculptural authority. The bone inlays in the teeth the deep volume of the forms, and the confident stacking of figures all suggest the hand of a highly trained Haida master working in the orbit of the great Argolite tradition, shaped by artists such as Charles Edenshaw. This piece is powerful because it does more than copy a totem pole. It preserves the language of a monumental art form in miniature turning stone into lineage, story, and presence.
Do you have any feeling for value?
Really don't. That was always kind of the question in the family. Is this a couple $1,000? Is this more money? Never was able to find a value.
On a retail basis, I would estimate this value would approach $100,000.
Oh, okay. Really?
Really.
Way off.
If you were to insure this, I think you could very legitimately appraise this for $125,000.
That's amazing.
This book is about the first Yupik writing, and this was written by my grandfather. And he learned to read and write this written Yupik language from Uyakuk, and he was known as Helperneck.
What looks like a simple handwritten book is really the trace of a written tradition, almost lost to time. This manuscript belongs to the story of Uyakuk, the Yupik Moravian helper, also known in English as Helper Neck, who around 1900 created an original writing system for Yugtun, or Central Alaskan Yupik. Scholars describe his achievement as extraordinary, because within only a few years he moved from picture-based marks toward a true syllabic script, and then taught it to others in the villages. That is exactly why a family manuscript like this carries so much weight. It is not just handwriting on paper. It is part of one of the most remarkable literacy stories in Alaska Native history. What makes this book even more powerful is the closeness of that history. The owner's grandfather learned to read and write in this script, and the family remembers that both grandparents used it as their only written language. That memory matches what is known of Uyakum Igai, or Helper Neck's writing, which spread through church and village networks after Uyakuk taught other Yupik speakers to use it. The modern Yupik language is generally written in a Latin-based orthography today, so manuscripts in this older system are rare and deeply important. In that sense, this book is more than a manuscript. It is a record of transmission preservation and cultural endurance.
I would probably insure a book like this for maybe over $100,000, but I also think that it's so unique in its nature that it would take some more research with other people to find out a little bit more about it, and maybe the price and value could go up, but it's a treasure.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Masi Cho.
Guyana.
You are somebody that speaks Yupik yourself. This is something that you could be very proud of.
Yes.
My family grew up in South America. We lived in Lima, Peru. My father was a geophysicist, and he appreciated archaeological items and items of primitive art.
What were the dates that your father lived in Peru?
We were in Peru from 57 to 66.
Gold from ancient Peru rarely speaks in a single voice. It speaks through masks, beads, ornaments, and sacred figures, each one carrying a different part of a lost world. This collection, gathered in Peru between 1957 and 1966, belongs to the long tradition of pre-Columbian Andean metalwork, where gold was valued not as money, but as a material of rank ritual and divine power. Because the family acquired the pieces before the 1970 UNESCO convention, that early collecting history also forms an important part of their story. Ancient Peruvian goldwork, especially from the north coast, is strongly associated with elite dress burial display and religious authority. What makes this group so compelling is its variety. Rather than repeating one object type, it seems to gather an entire language of adornment, funerary masks, necklace, beads, suspended ornaments, and deity-like imagery holding a scepter, a familiar sign of status and power. North Coast Peruvian burials are well known for including hammered gold masks, while beads and sheet metal ornaments were worn on the body or attached to costume, creating surfaces that flashed with movement, sound, and light. The broad dating described in the appraisal also makes sense. Some pieces may indeed be very early, while others fit later traditions before the Inca period. Cultures such as the Moche and later Sican are especially tied to high-status metal regalia on Peru's north coast. Seen together, this is not just a case of old gold. It is a compact portrait of ancient Andean identity where dress ceremony and the afterlife were all bound together in metal.
They're beads, there's holes in the back of them. So you have an amazing collection of personal adornment. This is worth some money. A conservative price for this, assuming that everything that I said is legitimate, conservatively you're looking at $50,000 to $100,000.
That's incredible.
These were my grandfather's. I've had them since my mother passed away. He was a scenic designer of Broadway scenery in Manhattan and did numerous Broadway shows. But he was a world traveler, Alaska, Africa, all of Europe.
Some family keepsakes sit quietly for years, and then one day they open a door to an entire world. These three Northwest Coast carvings do exactly that. Collected in Alaska around 1908 to 1910, they come from the cultural world of the Tlingit and Haida, where carving was never just decoration, but a way of holding status ceremony and story in wood. The bowl likely Haida grows out of the tradition of grease or oil dishes, yet by the late 19th century, pieces like this were also being made for trade. Even so, it still carries real presence with cedar construction, abalone inlay on the outside, bone inlay within, and animated bear imagery that gives the surface life. The feast ladle belongs to that same period and reflects another iconic form from Northwest Coast life. Even when carved for outside buyers, these ladles kept the scale and drama of the originals used in communal settings, so the object still feels bold and ceremonial. But the true centerpiece is the rattle. Probably Tlingit and dating from the mid-19th century, it is carved with extraordinary force. A shaman rides on the back of a raven, while a kingfisher and frog imagery suggest the transfer of spirit and power. The worn handle shows real use, and that wear matters. It tells us this was not made only to be admired. It was handled, performed with, and brought fully into life.
The bowl at auction, I would be very comfortable estimating that at $8,000 to $12,000.
My God.
Oh, it's a super bowl. It's really wonderful. The ladle, I think, again, very comfortably $4,000 to $6,000.
Good heavens.
Okay? I'm saving this one to the last.
Okay.
I think it's really super. I would be, again, very comfortable at auction, estimating this at $40,000 to $60,000.
You've got to be kidding me.
And I think that's pretty conservative. I
Really?
think, you know, with all the conditions and everything lined up, I think you might even double this.
Really?
It's a really super example.
I have a painting that was in the Carnegie Mansion in New York City. My father-in-law worked as a boiler man for the Carnegie family. while Mrs. Carnegie was still alive, but Mr. Carnegie had already passed. And it was in my in-laws' house since 1946, which is the year my husband was born, and he remembers it being in the house all those years and loved it.
A portrait hidden for decades behind its own dust cover can still step forward with startling clarity. This painting does exactly that. It is an oil portrait by Joseph Henry Sharp, born in 1859 in Ohio, one of the artists most closely tied to Taos and to the rise of native portraiture in the American Southwest. Sharp first visited Taos in 1893, later became a founding force in the Taos art colony, and built much of his reputation on portraits of native sitters painted with unusual seriousness and dignity. What gives this work its special force is its directness. The subject is believed to be a Taos Indian girl, probably painted around 1900 at a moment when artists from across the country were coming to Taos and working from live models. Sharp's signature, partly hidden under the dust at the edge, confirms the hand behind it, and the fact that the painting remained sealed and largely untouched for so long helps explain its unusually fresh condition. Painted in oil on board, it carries the qualities collectors most admire in Sharp's early Taos portraits: quiet presence, close observation, and a refusal to turn a sitter into mere decoration. Comparable Smithsonian works show how often Sharp painted native subjects from life in Taos, giving them both individuality and calm authority. That is why this picture feels larger than a forgotten object from an old mansion. It is a strong, early Sharp, and more than that, a portrait that turns stillness itself into character.
If it were to be in a retail gallery situation, this painting would bring between $50,000 and $70,000.
I can't believe it. That's amazing.
It's really wonderful. I look at this, you know, I get these, you know, goose pimples thinking about, like, this is not, you didn't know that it was there. And it's just a wonderful, great painting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's wonderful news. This is so unbelievable.
Yeah.
This was left to me by my great uncle. It originated from John Muir.
John Muir, the naturalist,
right,
conservationist, and the founder of the Sierra Club.
Exactly right. Turns out he's the older brother of my great-great-grandfather. It was handed down through the generations.
Some family heirlooms feel important because of who owned them. This one feels unforgettable because it carries both a great name and a powerful ceremonial tradition. It is a Tlingit raven rattle from southeast Alaska, likely collected in the Glacier Bay region in the late 1870s, when John Muir was traveling there with Tlingit guides. Raven rattles were not ordinary objects. They were used by high-ranking men in dance and by shamans in ceremony, which means this piece once belonged to a world of performance status and spiritual power. What gives the rattle its force is the layered imagery. The raven forms the main body, while the frog and human figure add to a visual language of transformation and transmitted power. In Northwest Coast belief, the raven is often linked to bringing light into the world, and on related examples, the small form in the beak can represent the sun. The surviving paint, the worn surface, and even the missing limb matter because they show this was not made to sit untouched. It was carried shaken and brought fully to life in ceremony.
At auction, it would probably bring $30,000.
Wow.
An insurance value would probably be in the $45,000 range. So
I need to insure it.
Well, about 3 years ago in western New York,
there was a tribal auction of the tribal artifacts, and this was one of the items that was listed. I really liked the lines and the angles of it, and paid $85 for it. Tried to do a little bit of research on it. I'm thinking it could be from Western Africa. I'm not sure.
At first glance, this figure feels almost too striking to be real, and that is exactly what makes it so fascinating. Widely identified as a Bamana Dionyeni figure from Mali, it belongs to the visual world of initiation and performance rather than simple display. Bamana female figures of this type are associated with Jo society events and often embody an idealized young woman, which helps explain the strong chest-balanced stance and carefully shaped body. Comparable museum and scholarly descriptions connect related Nyaleni or Dionyeni figures to initiation dance and ideas of feminine beauty in Bamana culture. What gives this example its power is the evidence of use. The wear on the arms, face, chest, belly, and base falls exactly where a danced object would be handled, supporting the idea that it was carried and placed at the center of a ceremonial circle. The pierced ears and coiffure also make sense in that context, since related figures are known to have been enhanced with metal ornaments, beads, or red attachments. Stylistically, the long nose and the presence of eyes make the piece a little unusual, but those differences do not remove it from the Bamana world. They suggest a local variation possibly shaped by neighboring traditions. Taken together, the age, wood, wear, and form make it feel less like a decorative carving and more like a lived ceremonial object with real authority.
This piece at auction or for a good insurance value is going to be $30,000 to $40,000.
Wow, fantastic. Unbelievable.
You didn't expect that,
wow,
did you?
No, I did not.
I think this piece needs more work, and I'd want to really be able to have an authenticator study it. In the event it turns out not to be authentic, I think it's still an absolutely extraordinary figure and very beautiful. I would put $800 to $1,200 as an insurance value.
My grandfather bought it in Wewoka, Oklahoma from his doctor. And then when he passed away in 1968, my grandmother wanted to throw the painting away. And my mother said, no, I want to keep it. And so she did. And 6 years ago, then she gave it to me. I did have it restored and then properly framed. I think I spent about $3,000, $3,500.
What began as a painting nearly thrown away turns out to be a vivid record of native life seen from within. This work is by Ernest Spybuck, the absentee Shawnee artist, born in 1883 near Tecumseh, Oklahoma,
It
who is now
reminds me
recognized
of
as
the
one of the
stillness you
earliest
find
native
out here,
painters to
even with all
document
this
ceremonial
movement in the
and social
painting.
life from his own community's point of view. Largely self-taught, Spybuck was encouraged by anthropologist Mark Raymond Harrington, and many of his works later entered museum collections, including the Smithsonian. The title, Wild Ride Green Corn Dance. Kickapoo's Indians and Shawnees matters because it points to a seasonal ceremonial gathering tied to renewal Thanksgiving and the first edible green corn. That gives the painting more than visual energy. It gives it cultural rhythm. Spybuck's gift was that he did not turn native ceremony into spectacle for outsiders. He painted what he knew, and that is why the mixed media surface feels so alive. With pencil watercolor and touches of ink, he built movement, crowding, and detail into a scene that feels both immediate and deeply observed. Green corn traditions are historically associated with renewal and first fruits among several native communities, including Shawnee groups. This is why the painting feels larger than a collectible object. It is a rare native-made record of ceremony community and continuity carried onto paper by someone who was painting his own world rather than imagining it from a distance.
If you were to offer this piece at auction today, it would sell for about $35,000.
Oh my, that's much more than what I expected to hear.
An Apache Indian gave these to General John Bullis. After General Bullis moved to San Antonio, Texas, he gave a lot of his Apache Indian things to my great-grandmother. They had named one of their children William Bullis Casson, after General Bullis. She had them put in the Whitty Museum, just loaned them to the museum for a long time. But when the museum wanted them donated, she did not want to donate it, so she took it back.
A case of Apache objects like this does not feel like a collection assembled later. It feels like a frontier world held together in one place. The group is tied to John Lapham Bullis, born in 1841 in New York, a Civil War veteran who later served in the Southwest and became closely connected with Apache communities at San Carlos. That provenance matters, because objects that can still be traced to a named historical figure and a specific native setting are exceptionally rare. Instead of surviving as detached artifacts, these pieces remain anchored to a real time, a real place, and a real chain of family memory. What gives the group its depth is the range of Apache life it preserves. The moccasins are linked to the mountain spirit dance, a ceremonial tradition associated with blessing protection and sacred power. The small pouch and striker light cases speak to everyday use and mobility, while the war club brings in the horseback world of defense and warfare. The awl case points toward women's labor, reminding us that sewing hide work and survival were as central to Apache life as ceremony and conflict. Seen together, these are not isolated objects. They form a compact portrait of ritual travel work and identity. That is what makes this group so moving. It is not only beautiful native material culture. It is a rare set of witnesses to Apache history preserved with enough provenance to let the past remain personal as well as historical.
If they were to come up for sale, I think they would bring on the low end at an auction $25,000 for what's in this case here. And on the high end, probably as much as $35,000, maybe a little more.
It's wonderful to know that.
My grandfather got this for me. I was 12 years old when he gave it to me, but he gave me this for my birthday. You know, when you're 12 years old, you're kind of looking for a bicycle or something like that, and I got this. At the time, I didn't realize really what I had, but now I do, and so it was a great gift that he gave to me. He paid $12 for it at an auction.
A gift given to a 12-year-old boy for $12 at auction does not sound like the beginning of a major historical treasure. And yet this album turns out to hold exactly that. Created in 1873 from albumin photographs printed from glass negatives, it brings together 50 images arranged on 25 double-sided mounts, most of them showing members of the Ute people. The photographer was W.G. Chamberlain, born in 1815 and active in Denver after the Civil War, where he became known for Western views and for photographing native communities. The first page shows that the album was assembled by Eliza W. Lyon, whose handwriting also appears in the captions below the images. What makes this album so compelling is the way it captures native life at a moment of visible cultural change. One man wears a Western shirt, a Navajo blanket at his waist, and a top hat gained through trade, while another Ute warrior places photographs in his hatband, turning an object once feared as the work of a shadow catcher into something proudly displayed. The details are extraordinary, from trade bead necklaces to German silver ornaments, and they show how identity status and adaptation could all appear in a single portrait. More than a photograph album, this is a rare record of encounter self-presentation and survival in the American West.
On a retail basis, I would value this at about $25,000.
Well, that's better than 12. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty good.
You'd be very comfortable at $35,000 insurance value.
I know they're vintage concho belts, which means they're Navajo. They came to me through a friend before he died. He gave them to me. I suspect that this one's older, but I don't know any more than that.
Why do you think this one's older?
Because it's plainer. Just looking at some of the tool marks where the leather goes through, I mean, those almost look like they were cut with a cold chisel.
Right.
And then I look at this one, and the stamps are a lot more complicated, and these.
Some objects carry their history right on their surface, and these two Navajo concho belts do exactly that. At first glance, the lower belt feels older because it is plainer, more direct, and more rugged in its workmanship, and that instinct is right. Early Navajo conchos grew out of Spanish bridle ornaments, which were originally round, and when Navajo silversmiths adapted them into belts, the forms gradually became oval. The simpler belt likely dates to the 1880s, and its buckle still reflects that earlier stage when workmanship could be strong but less elaborate. The upper belt belongs to a later and more refined moment, probably around 1900 to 1910. Here, the silverwork shows the hand of a far more advanced platero, a master smith, who knew how to raise stamp chisel and shape silver into richer, more confident designs. That difference matters because together the two belts show the evolution of Navajo silversmithing from its earlier Spanish-influenced roots into a more fully developed native art form. The history behind that transformation also runs through Bosque Redondo, where Navajo metalwork expanded in important ways during and after that traumatic period. Seen side by side, these belts are not just beautiful pieces of jewelry. They are a record of technique survival and artistic growth.
If it came up for sale at a good auction these days, I think it would bring somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. So a significant amount of money because of the quality of the top one. If it came up at a public auction, I would think it would bring $6,000 to $8,000 because the workmanship is just superb, and it's great to see Navajo silverwork of this quality come in Albuquerque.
My father collected primitive art. That's a Mortlock Island mask, South Pacific, and it's typically, this style mask is much larger and also typically has a finial on it. It's a ceremonial mask. This is a Solomon Island canoe prow, so they would lash this onto the front of their canoe, and that would be for safe travels and for protection of the crew on board. The canoe prow he bought from a dealer, and I think he paid $450 for that.
Some objects carry the memory of ceremony, while others carry the memory of travel. These two Pacific works hold both. One is a rare ceremonial mask from the Mortlock Islands in Micronesia, and the other is a carved canoe prow ornament from the Solomon Islands in Melanesia. Though they come from different island worlds, both were made for lives shaped by ritual danger and the power of protection. The Mortlock mask is especially unusual because masks of this kind are extremely rare. Its painted surface, raised eyes, and worn areas on the back suggest that it was not made simply to be admired, but was genuinely used. Even the damage adds something important because it shows contact age and history. The Solomon Islands piece had a different role. It would have been lashed to the front of a fishing or hunting canoe, serving as a protective image for the men on board and for the journey itself. The surface where the treatment of the hairstyle and the carved details around the ears all suggest an object that once had a real place in use, not just in display. What makes these two pieces so compelling is that they still hold that sense of purpose. One belongs to ceremony, the other to movement across water, yet both were shaped by belief. Together they stand as powerful reminders that oceanic art was never only decorative. It was made to guard, to guide, and to carry meaning through life.
I would say you should probably insure this for $30,000 to $40,000, and that one maybe $20,000 to $25,000 on an insurance value.
Got it.
Did I answer all your questions?
You did, yes.
Do you have any more questions?
My grandfather was a donor to Bacone College, which was a Native American college in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And one day he put me in the car and we went to Bacone College and we came home with this. And his friend Dick West carved it. And I don't know like if he commissioned it or if he just saw it, liked it, bought it.
Sometimes a sculpture says as much about the place that shaped it as it does about the figure it shows. This work, titled Coyote Warrior, is tied to Walter Richard Dick West, the Cheyenne artist who led the art department at Bacone College in Muskogee, Oklahoma, from 1947 to 1970. Bacone was one of the key centers of Native art in Oklahoma, and West was known far more as a painter than as a sculptor, which is exactly why a carving like this feels so rare and important. His paintings are represented in major Oklahoma collections, including Gilcrease. What makes the piece so compelling is the way it balances detail with mystery. The profile at first can suggest a woodland identity, but the hairstyle reads more clearly as a roach, the upright headdress associated with plains traditions, once finished with horsehair rising from the top and sides. The long loincloth, the rattle in the hand, and the title, Coyote Warrior, push the figure toward a broader pan-Indian image rather than a strictly defined tribal portrait. That ambiguity gives the sculpture its strength. It feels less like a fixed ethnographic statement and more like an artist's personal vision of Native power movement and presence.
I would say that this, for insurance purposes, the value of this would be between $25,000 and $30,000.
That's a motorcycle. That's a Harley.
Yeah.
Wow.
My grandfather was in the antiques and art business, and he was himself a third-generation dealer in Austria. And when the Nazis came through Austria, they confiscated everything he owned, and he escaped with this piece and a few other pieces. And then he gave it to my dad, who in turn gave it to me.
Some ancient faces survive not as complete monuments, but as quiet witnesses torn from a larger world. This Maya stucco head is one of them. Made around 600 to 900 AD, probably in Mexico, during the classic Maya period, it was originally modeled onto the facade of a building as the portrait of a dignitary. That origin is important because Maya rulers and nobles often placed their images on architecture, turning buildings into statements of power rank and sacred identity. What makes this piece so compelling is the tension between fragility and survival. Stucco is an extremely delicate material, yet this head remains in remarkably strong condition with no obvious heavy restoration around the mouth, and with traces of its original polychrome still visible, especially red. The face is also beautifully balanced. The eyes, nose, and mouth are handled with unusual sensitivity, giving the portrait a calm but noble presence. Even though it was chipped from the surface of a building long ago, it still carries the refinement of a finished work of sculpture rather than a broken fragment. Its documented presence in Europe by the 1920s or 1930s and arrival in the United States around 1940 or 1941 also matter today because modern museum standards around cultural property are heavily shaped by the 1970 UNESCO Convention, which made earlier provenance especially significant.
It came out early, it's in terrific shape. I think this is a $20,000 to $30,000 object. Wow. Now, the reason why I say that is because a lot of Pre-Columbian can't be acquired by institutions because it's illegal. This one has solid documentation, and so I'm going to push the price a little bit.
I bought it at a New York gallery, probably 35 years ago. I've had it at home and enjoyed it ever since.
So what'd you pay for it?
$7,500.
What first appears to be a dazzling object of beads and ritual display slowly reveals itself as a work of deep Yoruba religious meaning. This is an Orisha Oko staff sheath made by a Yoruba bead artist in what is now Nigeria, probably in the early 20th century. Museum records describe Oko, or Orisha Oko, as the deity of agriculture, prosperity, and fertility, and his sacred staff was one of the key emblems of his cult. Petitions for healing, justice, safe childbirth, and abundance were directed to that staff through a priestess who served as its ritual keeper. What makes this example so exceptional is its richness from top to bottom. The sheath is covered in European glass beads, and the iconography suggests status authority and sacred protection. The crown-like form at the top fits museum descriptions, noting that although Orisha Oko was not a king, he was often honored through imagery associated with power and rank. The condition also matters. Comparable museum pieces from the late 19th to early 20th century show that these sheaths were functional ritual coverings used to dress the staff when it was not active in ceremony, so the survival of one, this elaborate and so well preserved, is remarkable. That is why this object feels larger than a single ceremonial implement. It is a rare survival from a Yoruba religious world in which art, fertility, agriculture, and sacred authority were all bound together in one form.
I would give you an auction estimate of $10,000 to $15,000, expecting it to go much higher. I feel confident that a gallery would ask $20,000 to $30,000 for this. So, how did you do on your investment?
Well, I've done okay.
Not bad.
It's not bad.
My father gave them to me.
And when did your dad get them?
I believe in the early 70s.
I understand he was a traveler, a world traveler.
Yes, he was. He told me they were pre-Columbian. They used to be attached to Mayan warriors' armor.
First of all, they're not Mayan.
Okay.
Some objects reveal their true power the moment they are lifted in the hand. These two gold pendants do exactly that. Long thought to be Mayan armor ornaments, they actually belong to the gold-working traditions of Central America, with one linked to Veraguas in Panama and the other to Costa Rica. That matters because gold ornaments from these regions were not everyday decoration. Museum research on ancient Panama and Costa Rica describes such pendants as insignia of rank, worn by leaders, ritual specialists, or other high-status individuals, often with imagery drawn from birds of prey, crocodiles, serpents, and composite beings. What makes these two pieces especially compelling is the way their forms match both ritual use and long burial. One pendant reads as an eagle, the other combines reptilian and serpent-like imagery, and both carry the dramatic profile and symbolic force collectors look for in ancient Central American gold. The crushed suspension support on one piece is actually a good sign, because objects like these were commonly buried as funerary offerings, and pressure in the tomb could damage the hanging loop while leaving the sculptural body intact. The repaired loop on the other pendant also fits a long life of use and survival rather than modern manufacture. Together with the tested gold content, these details support authenticity and place the works broadly between 1000 and 1500 AD.
I believe, and again, it's a crazy market. It fluctuates a lot. I'm going to say that this one is in the $8,000 to $10,000 range, and this one is in the 12 to 18. It's a good day, isn't it?
Yes, that's so exciting.
Well, it's exciting that you brought him in, and we thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right.
My mother had a friend that passed away, and she got several of his artifacts. He was a guy that had lots of travel in his history and his past, and so he picked up items like this during his travel.
Okay, and what year do you think your mother got this?
It was about 10 years ago. I couldn't find any information about it on the internet, but I did think that possibly it was an Indian artifact, maybe from Mexico.
At first glance, this figure feels like the kind of ancient object that could easily be mistaken for Mexico, but its real story begins much closer to home. It is an authentic Mississippian hunchback effigy figure from northeastern Arkansas, dating roughly from 900 to 1500 AD. That matters, because northeastern Arkansas was one of the great centers of Mississippian ceramic art, where effigy vessels and figures were made not just as objects of beauty, but as powerful ritual forms tied to belief, burial, and the afterlife. The white specks visible in the clay are a form of temper added to strengthen the vessel during firing, and that technical detail is one of the signs supporting authenticity. What makes this piece especially compelling is the way its physical wear supports its original function. The rubbing on the arms, face, chest, belly, and base falls exactly where repeated handling would occur, which fits the idea that it was used in a shrine or other ceremonial setting before burial. The opening at the back was likely not made to store anything, but to release pressure during firing and keep the figure from cracking or exploding in the kiln. Figures of this kind are often described as hunchbacks, and while they may look like portraits, scholars generally believe they carried a broader mythological or spiritual meaning. In that sense, this object is more than a ceramic figure. It is a survivor from a ritual world where clay symbolism and the journey into the afterlife were closely linked.
In a good auction or in a good gallery, this piece is going to sell for $10,000 to $15,000.
Oh, wow.
Now, I want to say the Roadshow is always mindful about various regulations that concern objects like this. It is illegal to take these off federal lands.
My mother gave this to me when I was a young girl before I left home. And so I've had it ever since.
And where is home? Where was home?
Samoa, South Pacific Islands, and grew up in Hawaii and El Paso.
Some family heirlooms arrive with a clear story. Others carry a little mystery with them. This necklace seems to hold both. It was long understood as a Samoan chiefly ornament, and that idea is not without reason. In Samoa, whale tooth necklaces are known as ula nifo and were closely tied to rank ceremony and special occasions. Yet the structure of this piece points just as strongly toward Fiji, where related necklaces made from split sperm whale teeth were worn by chiefs and other high-ranking people. In either case, it belongs to a world where rare materials were reserved for status gift-giving and ritual display. What makes the necklace so beautiful is the way strength has been transformed into elegance. A sperm whale tooth is naturally thick and heavy, but here it has been cut into long, slender pieces that create a lighter, more graceful rhythm around the neck. Between those ivory elements are red-white heart beads, a 19th century trade bead with a red outer layer and a white center. Together, the warm beads and the rich golden honey brown of the whale ivory give the necklace a remarkable depth of color. Because it has been restrung, the original binding no longer helps identify its exact origin with certainty. Even so, the overall form still places it firmly within the ceremonial art of the Pacific. It is not simply jewelry. It is an object of prestige shaped by rarity, beauty, and tradition.
In the Polynesian art market recently, normally a good conservative price retail would be between $8,000 and $10,000. But in the last couple of weeks, there have been some serious surprises in this area. And I wouldn't be surprised if it could even reach probably about $15,000.
Oh my God! Oh my goodness! Seriously?
I think you're surprised.
I am surprised. Oh my goodness.
I think it's a Colima dog, Pre-Columbian art. She came to me with the name Spot.
Would that refer to this area here, I would think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I bought it in 1999 from an art collector.
You did?
Who did collect. So I felt like it was something special. When I saw her, I just adored her. She was in an exhibition that I'd seen her in. So.
Oh, really?
At first glance, this Colima dog feels less like an artifact and more like a personality, created in western Mexico between 200 BC and 200 AD. She belongs to the ceramic tradition of ancient Colima, one of the most beloved areas of pre-Columbian art. These dogs are famous for their warmth, humor, and strong sculptural presence. But what makes this one stand out is her exceptional form. She has the broad, rounded body collectors admire most, yet she is actually hollow, which means the artist had to control weight balance and symmetry with remarkable skill. That balance is part of what makes her so appealing. The heavy body rests on relatively small legs, but the figure still feels stable, graceful, and alive. The dark patch on her surface is not damage, but a firing mark created during the original firing process, while the overall patina shows the quiet aging that gives ancient ceramics their authority. Colima dogs were often placed in tombs and are now seen as signature works of Western Mexican art. But this example goes beyond the usual standard. With her size, shape, and presence, she feels less like a surviving object and more like a masterpiece of ancient design.
I feel that in the marketplace today, she's worth $9,000 to $12,000 at auction.
Oh my gosh.
And just what a lovely piece of art she is. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I want to pet her.
Go ahead.
Spot, you're doing good. That's fantastic.
My husband was in Santa Fe and he purchased this from a gallery there, and he believed it to be by Charles Loma.
Do you recall what he paid for it at that time?
He seems to recall that it was about $700.
$700 in roughly 1980.
Or early 90s,
Early
he
90s.
thinks. Yeah.
Okay.
Some pieces of jewelry do not just sit on a belt. They announce an artist the moment you see them. This buckle was made by Charles Loma, the Hopi master widely regarded as the most influential Native American jeweler of the 20th century. Born in 1921 and active through the mid to late century, Loma changed native jewelry by moving beyond standard silver work and building bold compositions out of silver, gold, turquoise, coral, lapis, jet, and ivory. Museums identify his work by exactly those qualities: color structure and inventive inlay. What makes this buckle so compelling is that it carries the full Loma language in a small form. It is not flat decoration, but a miniature sculpture where materials are layered for design, balance, and color. The missing loop on the back is a minor issue and easy to replace, but the signed face, the strong patina from wear, and the likely 1960s to 1970s date place it in the period when Loma was redefining modern Hopi jewelry. That is why this object feels larger than a buckle. It is a concentrated example of innovation, craftsmanship, and presence from an artist who transformed the field.
I think on a retail basis, this would sell for $10,000.
Wow.
I believe if you wanted to go and insure this, maybe $12,500.
Great.
It's a Katsina doll. It was my father's. He taught school in southern Idaho during the 20s. When they relocated tribal people from different places, they sent the children all over the United States, and this young man became a friend of my father's, and when he left school, he gave my dad the doll.
Sometimes a small carving can hold a much bigger story. This Katsina doll comes from northern Arizona and belongs to the Hopi world, where Katsina figures were made not just as objects, but as carriers of teaching memory and spiritual meaning. What makes this example stand out is that it can be tied to Wilson Tawaquaptewa, the Oraibi chief, and one of the earliest Hopi carvers, whose work can be recognized by name. His dolls are known for breaking away from standard forms, often blending hints of animals or spirit beings into something more personal and unexpected. That is exactly why this piece feels so special. Instead of following a familiar Katsina type, it carries the unusual character collectors now associate with Tawaquaptewa. The faded indigo blue is an important clue, because that color appears repeatedly in works linked to him, and it gives the doll a softer, older presence. More than a traditional carving, this feels like an artist quietly reshaping tradition through his own vision. In the end, that is what gives the doll its power. It is rare, individual, and deeply connected to both Hopi tradition and the hand of a maker who chose to do something different.
On a bad day, this is worth $7,500 to $8,500. If it's a good day and the right collectors in the room, $9,000.
My goodness.
So it's something real special that you ended up with.
Oh, no kidding. And to know that you can recognize the maker, you know,
Yeah.
that is amazing. That surprises me. Surprises me a great deal.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
When my mother was pregnant with me, she was turning 40, and my father had befriended the widow of Carl Bach, the famous art dealer and collector, and he ended up purchasing about 20 pieces of Pre-Columbian and African art as a collection for my mother for her 40th birthday. And these are two of the pieces.
Two ancient objects gathered as a birthday gift can hold the weight of two very different civilizations. That is exactly what happens here. One piece is a Maya shell ornament, likely from Guatemala, and broadly datable to about 600 to 900 CE, a period when shell pendants and pectorals served as prestige ornaments in elite Maya dress. The other belongs to the Mezcala tradition of Western Mexico, known for its highly abstract greenstone figures generally dated between 300 BCE and 300 CE. Mezcala sculpture is known for being sharply reduced, elegant, and geometric, while Maya shell ornaments were often drilled to be worn or sewn onto clothing as visible signs of rank and sacred identity. The unusual strength of this pair lies not only in age, but in provenance. The family history links them to the early New York dealer Carl Beck. And that matters because documented ownership before the 1970 UNESCO Convention carries real importance in the modern antiquities world. A clear pre-1970 collecting history often becomes a major part of how ancient American works are understood today. What makes the pairing so memorable is the contrast between the two objects themselves. The shell piece carries Maya elegance and courtly display, while the Mezcala figure reduces the human body to something austere, angular, and nearly timeless. Set beside one another, they turn a family gift into a dialogue between two materials, two visual languages, and two ancient worlds.
I would not be surprised at all to see that at 8 to 12 if you were in some important gallery on 5th or Madison or something in New York.
I am a descendant of the man that was given the Peace Medal. He's my great-great-grandfather. He had 2 wives, 21 children, and he gave it to one of his children, who then gave it to her daughter, which was my grandmother, and then she gave it to my father, who in turn gave it to me.
A medal like this does more than survive. It carries the weight of ceremony leadership and family memory across generations. This Millard Fillmore Peace Medal, struck in 1850, belongs to the long tradition of presidential peace medals made by the United States for native leaders. The silver versions were the highest grade often intended for chiefs, which is why pieces like this were treasured, carefully kept, and passed down as family heirlooms. What makes this medal especially powerful is the way it joins official history with personal history. One side bears the image of Millard Fillmore, while the reverse presents a settler guiding a native figure toward the government's idea of civilization, a message that reflected federal policy in the mid-19th century. That symbolism is important, but what gives this medal real emotional force is the fact that it remained in the same family line. It was presented to an ancestor handed down through generations, and even appears in a family photograph worn by the owner's father. Because of that, the medal becomes more than a political object. It becomes a lived inheritance where national history, native identity, and family pride are held together in one remarkable piece.
It's really a beautiful example. I think I would be conservative, and at auction I think it would probably bring between $8,000 and $12,000.
Wow.
But it's a wonderful piece to have in your family
Yes.
with a great history.
Oh, it's worth so much more.
Absolutely.
To me.
Sure.
To me. Yes, I'm very proud.
My father-in-law passed away in '08, and this was in some of his stuff. It's in our possession now.
I leafed through it a little bit. There's a lot of newspaper articles. There's some poems. There's a lot of things that don't look like they're too valuable, but glued to the inside cover is this wonderful plains pictograph drawing.
Tucked inside an old scrapbook, this drawing turns out to hold far more than paper and ink. It is a plains ledger drawing linked to Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida, where native prisoners from the southern plains were held from 1875 to 1878 and produced drawings on ledger paper during captivity. Fort Marion ledger art is now recognized as one of the most important surviving forms of late 19th century plains narrative art. The inscription beneath this sheet identifies it as drawn by Bad Eye in 1878, and researchers today do document a bad eye among the Fort Marion, Kiowa prisoners, which makes the attribution especially compelling. What makes the image so powerful is that it remembers life at its height, rather than life in prison. The riders appear in full plains regalia with decorated horses, German silver bridles, and what look like Saltillo-style saddle blankets. Above them are name glyphs likely marking the warriors below. That combination of image and symbol sits at the heart of plains pictographic language, where identity, honor, and memory were carried through line rather than words. That is why this sheet feels larger than a page pulled from a book. It preserves the visual authority of the Buffalo days even after that world was closing. More than a drawing, it is a record of resilience, memory, and native self-representation made under confinement, yet still full of motion, pride, and presence.
At auction, this plains pictograph drawing would sell for about $8,000 to $12,000.
Oh goodness. That's good.
That's good.
That is
good. It's a beautiful work of art.
They've been in my family since about 1945. My dad bought a large collection from the Plains Indian area. The collection came with a number of Sharps rifles and some swords. And that's what he wanted. He appreciated these Indian things, but it wasn't his area of collecting or expertise.
These two southern plains objects carry more than beauty. They carry a whole system of belief. Identified as Kiowa and dating to about 1880, they belong to a world in which color ceremony and status were inseparable. The lower piece is a pipe tomahawk, combining a steel blade with a pipe bowl in one form. By the late 19th century, objects like this often functioned less as battlefield weapons than as prestige objects carried to express identity, rank, and the memory of warrior power. The upper object is a rattle used with song and drum to bring healing and spiritual force into ceremony. What gives the pair their depth is the symbolic language built into them. The red on the tomahawk is associated with upper world powers, especially Thunderbird and avian force, while darker tones refer to the lower world and yellow marks the earthly middle realm. The rattle carries a similar visual logic. Its eagle imagery evokes sacred bird power, and the halo-like form around the head suggests how Christian influence could be folded into older plains spiritual expression. The tomahawk head was forged by a blacksmith, likely non-native, while the haft beadwork fringe and hide show native workmanship and the adaptation of trade materials into a distinctly Kiowa ceremonial language.
On a retail basis, the pipe tomahawk, I think, would readily realize $4,500. It's very nicely done.
Oh, I knew it was nicely done, but wow.
The rattle...
Tell me more.
I'll tell you more. On a retail basis, I think this rattle would easily realize $5,500.
I just look at the beauty of them. I think they're astounding.
belonged to my grandfather, and it is some reins, rawhide reins and hobble made by Louis B. Ortega, and also a book that he signed to my grandfather, and some handwritten instructions because my grandfather needed some assistance with knowing how to tie something. And they became friends when my grandparents lived up in Cottonwood, California by Redding.
The beauty of this set is that it does not speak only about horsemanship. It speaks about mastery. These reins, hobbles, books, and handwritten instructions revolve around Luis B. Ortega, the California rawhide braider, born in 1897, now remembered as one of the greatest craftsmen in the vaquero tradition. Ortega learned his early skills on California ranches and later became so admired that the National Endowment for the Arts honored him with a National Heritage Fellowship in 1986, the nation's highest award in folk and traditional arts. In his later years, he also published California Hackamore and California Stock Horse books that helped preserve the language and practice of traditional California horsemanship. What makes these particular pieces so compelling is that they show Ortega not just as a maker, but as a teacher. The closed reins with romal belong to the refined one-handed riding style of the California vaquero, where balance, softness, and control mattered as much as appearance. The hobbles bring in the practical side of horse culture, while the signed books and handwritten tying instructions turn the group into something more personal than gear alone. Ortega's rawhide work was prized for its extraordinary precision, and the two-color braiding described here places the set above his plainest working level without reaching his most elaborate three-color show pieces. Seen together, these objects preserve craftsmanship, horsemanship, and friendship in one remarkably intimate archive.
This stuff is highly collected. For this grouping, $7,000 to $10,000.
Wow. Well, it's very sentimental to me, so it's not going anywhere.
This has been passed down through our family. It would be my husband's great-great-grandma's uncle. He was in the Civil War. As far as we know, it's always been hanging from his gun that he used in the Civil War. We were told that it's a tobacco dryer, and he would put his tobacco in there and chew it, and then put it in there to dry, and then get it back out and chew it again.
At first glance, this small carving might seem like nothing more than an old family keepsake. But the closer you look, the more remarkable it becomes. Made around 1850, it is an early Alaska native object, the kind of piece that people once would have described as Eskimo. It was carved in the form of a seal and used as a snuff container, a practical object, but one filled with meaning. For a hunter out on the icy tundra, the seal was not just prey. It was the very animal he was hoping to find, so carving the container in that form gave it a deeper spiritual power, as if the seal's own energy could help guide the hunt. Then the piece reveals even more. On the back is another face, hidden at first, suggesting the spirit living within the seal. It also served as a small finger mask. Tiny holes around the edge once held feathers, and when it was worn and moved, those feathers would flutter and make the object feel alive. The wood was carefully chosen as well. Northern cedar was ideal for a cold, damp climate because it is light, durable, and resistant to moisture and cracking. Small in size, but rich in meaning. This is a rare object where daily use belief and performance all come together.
I think readily on a retail market about $8,500, $8,500.
Really?
It's a very desirable object,
Wow.
beautifully carved.
Oh my gosh. We had no idea.
Well, will you attach it back to the gun and hang it on the wall?
Probably not. I'll probably have to go in something nicer now.
Well,
wow.
But thanks so much for bringing it.
Thanks. Oh, that's amazing.